Hello and welcome to this edition of the Halcyon Raise Review. My name's Lorne Wisely, I'm going to be your host for this episode. And on this edition, Rage. It's a game I got at the same time as Battlefront 3. Why is that relevant? Well, because both games look good, both were first-person shooters, both focused on a slightly nihilistic version of storytelling, whereas things like Fallout and Call of Duty tend to have, even with their gore and, slightly dark worldview, still seem to have somewhat of a positivity or an arcadey style feel to them to a degree. These games, not so much. Specifically Rage, though. A game that I, at the time, thought was graphically outstanding for what it was. Gameplay-wise was reasonably fun, had a diverse amount of weaponry, a open world that you could explore, and a reasonably diverse level of enemies. However, with time and hindsight, this game hasn't held up as well as you perhaps would like. Few reasons for this, which we'll get onto in a moment, but with the release of Rage 2, pegged for some time in the near future, I thought it'd be pertinent to go back and look at Rage. So on this occasion, let's take a look at id Software's first attempt at recreating a proper Doom before they palmed it off and remade Doom. This is the Halcyon Razor review of Rage. So, first off, like with any good game, let's talk about the most critical element, the gameplay.
The gameplay consists mainly of first-person shooting with elements of free roaming and third-person driving across a barren wasteland inhabited by various enemies and NPCs. You'll have various minor and story-based quests that you'll accrue by speaking to characters throughout the world, and not a lot else. In terms of other things to do, you have poker, a card game of sorts, similar to Gwent in terms of applying stat-based buffs to characters you've met in the world, and Five Finger Fillet, which are all decent distractions, but the main one is kart racing, which can be fun in bursts, but given the AI is cheap and rubber bands a lot, takes some of the fun out of it to a degree. But given you can customize and weaponize your chosen vehicle, which can be upgraded, and you can trade up for stronger, faster vehicles as you progress, it does provide a nice little distraction. However, it feels a little basic when all is said and done, and you're not machine gunning and rocket blasting your enemies. What the bulk of this game is, however, amounts to a shooter that borrows elements from Fallout, a teeny bit of Call of Duty, and a slab of Doom thrown in for good measure. It's gory at times, the enemies tend to have different movement patterns and attack methods, the initial gang you come across was dynamic and manoeuvred in ways I thought were interesting and challenging at first, until you mastered the combat and gunplay. The guns vary, but all feel really precise and almost hilariously accurate. Good players of this game will run through minimal ammunition given how easy it is to pick off enemies at a distance, and when up close, the shotgun will decimate even the more mobile enemies like mutants for instance. The first person shooter segments are fun in bursts but nothing special. The game changes up playstyle from tactical military approaches to the game show style segment where you compete for money by killing mutants, but all in all the game tries its best to present you with different locales and enemies to fight with, one or two bosses thrown in for good measure. You also have gadgets like turrets and remote control bombs you can use, as well as a defibrillator mechanic, where if you take too much damage, you have the chance to discharge a blast of electricity to dispatch foes and gain a little bit of health back. The quests I mentioned earlier range from fetch quests to shooting galleries to A to B to speak to this person quests, but again, nothing tremendously original. You can also craft different grades of bullets and ammunition, craft grenades, healing packs, and you can trade them for cash if need be. Plus the game has, I would say, a good balanced UI and loadout menu for both selection of 4 weapons at any one time and 4 gadgets or items. This helps the player in combat handle various situations more easily with the right item or weapon, just a button press away. Overall, the game is fun in bursts, and the combat is refined enough to get you hooked in initially, but overall it's frankly repetitive and boring, lacking in anything truly original that you wouldn't find in Fallout. Add to this, the RPG elements amount to trading with vendors, which in of itself can be broken with a duplication glitch. You have a world that feels barren in more than one sense, and has little to do beyond progressing the story and the initial thrill of combat.
And so, with gameplay out of the way, let's talk about the story, setting, premise, and characters of this world.
In 2135, former US Marine Lieutenant Nicholas Rain emerges from an underground shelter called an Ark, 106 years after being put into stasis. These underground shelters are the direct result of the Eden Project, a massive international undertaking in which case hundreds of arks containing cryogenic pods were sealed under the surface of the Earth in order to preserve enough of the human population to rebuild civilization after the asteroid collision. The Eden Project was far less successful than hoped, as Rain's ark in particular was heavily damaged, with all of its other residents dead and equipment destroyed, as he wakes up alone with no specific goal in mind.
I had to Wikipedia that because I honestly couldn't remember the premise of this game beyond you wake up in a post-apocalyptic world. I even forgot there was an asteroid, forgot the year, and forgot the bloke's name. So when your gameplay is so meh that you rely on your story and characters, and I can't even remember any of them beyond Dan Hagar, and only because he was voiced by John Goodman, it's not a good sign that it's so bland and formulaic it just drains from your memory. The protagonist is mute and you never see his face, but his actions never have anything unique to them. You don't feel that this world has any consequences, and you feel you're crossing off boxes of the story as you go, with the ending feeling so odd given the lack of a build. In essence, the main enemies, the Authority, have a base that no one has ever been in, or made it out of, and you just walk in, kill everyone, download the location of every other ark in the world, open them, and the game ends. It just feels like a massive dropped ball. No companions, no rivals or boss level characters to face beyond 2, no great losses to make me care about the stakes of this world. It's basic and a total wash in terms of a world that had a tough time in finding any positives for me. The Authority doesn't seem to have any real motivations other than
We be evil.
And the reasons they have such advanced tech are never elaborated on. All the opportunities to have aliens or characters of different persuasions or any moral choices was ripe here, given it had an entire open world to fill. But alas, for some reason they decided to hang their hat on the gameplay being balls to the walls fun, which it simply isn't, meaning the story is underwhelming and lacking any real replayability. I mean, don't get me wrong, the game show host is quirky and fun while he lasts, but you can only replay that mission once and never interact with him again. The mad scientist, again, is visually appealing, but again lacking in any real depth. And like I say, the lack of companions seems like it should have been elaborated on in this world. There was plenty to do in terms of taking them on the ride and showing the world through the prism of another person's perspective.
And so, with story and characters out of the way, let's talk about the presentation style and design of this game.
The game, to its credit, has moments where it looks really good. For a 360 game, it was well defined, with plenty of detail, and some very realistic character models and motion capture, if a little cartoony at times. It has a very bright and light feel to the world. I never felt the same drudge or washout I felt in, say, Fallout. And there is plenty of attention to detail in this world, if not with the settlements, which have a very small feel to them. Same with the level of designs, detailed but not complex. I like the loot available in this game, and I like the fact that there's tons of ways to approach combat, and the game affords you this by laying down options in the levels. They have verticality, you can follow a more stealthy approach, but not for long given the game has been designed more in line with Doom, and that you'll come into corridors of enemies who you must eliminate in systematic fashion. The vehicles are detailed enough, the enemies have different feels and looks, but with little depth within their own subsects, and I felt that the NPCs had some details, but the lip syncing and how alive they looked was a little poor. The soundtrack again is lacking in any real imagination. The sound design is fine, but I don't remember a single track from the game, not one climactic moment where the music built to a crescendo, nothing, and it feels like a missed opportunity aside for some banjo music thrown in for good measure. Finally, the game was reasonably stable, but I did have a few game-ending crashes which was infuriating at times. The game came on 2 discs, which again was odd and again a little senseless, and with the addition of the multiplayer it was underwhelming. And as I mentioned before, there's a duplication glitch that ruins the economy if you allow yourself, like I did, the ability to not go full god mode to see if it at least makes the game more of a laugh to mow through. It did not. So in summary, the game looks good in places, feels good in places, but overall feels a little unfinished. Like it was pushed out before it was able to be fully fleshed out to the fullest extent. Had it been, this could have been an amazing game to look at and play in. But like the story, and like the combat to a certain degree, it all just feels a little undercooked.
And there you have it, Rage. Mixed bag. I enjoyed the game for what it was back in the day. It presented a unique challenge, especially on the harder difficulties, albeit, yes, pretty buggy. Yes, some exploitative cheats that made the game unplayable if you decided to utilize them. Yes, the driving mechanics were a bit and the supposed open world really wasn't that much of an open world. However, I remember having fun with the game. I just remember the story not being engaging. If I'm going to equate it to anything in that respect, it's kind of like The Division. I enjoyed the gameplay. I kind of enjoyed the world. I enjoyed the weapons, and I enjoyed some of the enemies you fight and the tactics you have to employ. However, it just doesn't feel fleshed out. It feels somehow lacking in certain areas of both quality and in terms of its themes and what it's trying to put across to you as a player to stand out from other things like its Big Brother Doom or contemporaries like Call of Duty and Battlefield. I'm going to make a recommendation for this game specifically without playing the second one if you need a break from something like a Call of Duty or a Battlefield where it's more tactical, more realistic. This game brings it back to the more arcadey styles, sort of like a Duke Nukem amalgamation. Over-the-top weapons, over-the-top enemies, lots of swearing, lots of gore, lots of blood for the sake of it. In terms of a rating though, it's got to be no better than a 6. It is average at best in terms of its soundtrack being virtually non-existent, some of its graphics not holding up at all well and popping in, while others stand out to this day as being very, very good, very detailed. Its gameplay becoming somewhat repetitive towards the middle to the latter parts, and no real characters and story to speak of, and a confusing ending that doesn't really explain anything to me that I didn't already know, and then makes an entirely huge leap in logic to like I was supposed to follow where the game was going. It's just a bit jarring at times. So play this game if you've not played it before, only if you're desperate for first-person shooter action, which is hilarious to think about considering the number of choices you have, but it remains to be seen whether or not this is going to be critical for you to play before Rage 2, depending on whether or not it's a direct sequel or just a takeoff of the original. So thanks very much for watching this episode of the Halcyon Razor Review. Please like, share, subscribe, check out some of the other content creators in the description below, follow me on Twitter, and as always, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you guys in the next episode of the Halcyon Razor Review.